people landing on this planet and interacting with what was here and starting again, and kind of like I guess a interplanetary homesteading.
What you're talking about here is a story being passed down for hundreds or thousands of years and then getting written down. It's just like the Bible.
Otherwise, everybody's just going to sit home and masturbate and drink beer all day. You know?
Nothing wrong with that. But 10 different spots or whatever under the ocean that are possible Atlantises. Maybe they're all the idea of Atlantis. Maybe they all had that same kind of history.
Welcome to yet another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and we would absolutely love it if you'd like and share this video, subscribe to the channel. That's what cool people do, and you want to be cool too, don't you?
Not me. I'm a nerd. I'm Casey Rochford, and we write our own music for each and every show, and you will absolutely love it. And you should totally go get it on iTunes or Amazon, stream it on Spotify, and check out ksmvidcast.com because you can find all the episodes and all the songs and everything there to your heart's desire, and you'll find it. Check it out. So, what should we discuss on today's exciting episode of Kitchen Sink Microscopy?
Well, you know, we don't do we haven't done a lot of topics of, kind of going into like the woo territory or things like that. And I think we should probably do one. And I think it's probably a good idea to talk about mystic places, specifically Atlantis. So I think we should talk about Atlantis and other such mystical lost civilizations.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of cool stuff to go into with, the what ifs behind Atlantis, because I read a lot about Atlantis some 20 years ago or so. In fact, like one of the first songs I wrote, which the name of it is escaping me, I should probably look that up, but one of the first songs I wrote was about the idea of Atlantis, and it just really fascinated me. Like, did it sink? Did it explode? Is it just a mistaken some other island that is perfectly fine and people already live on it and they just don't know it's Atlantis? Or was it a spaceship?
Oh, yeah. It's like super fascinating. A very, very interesting topic. However you feel about it, I think, that's true. Like maybe it's just the Americas, or some place that sank or was destroyed or something like that. And me, I'm kind of one that maybe leans a little towards the philosophy that humankind, as we know it, came from space, from somewhere else. And some of these stories are distortions of stories of the past, like origin stories and things like that have kind of changed over time, I guess.
Could even be that hollow earth theory, because the whole idea of Atlantis is that there's like concentric circles or whatever, that the island is circular and has levels to it or whatever, right? But that's kind of like what the hollow earth thing is like. Being that earth is flat, it's hollow like this. So
man, we're just going into all kinds of different directions here.
No, but I like with the idea of the hollow earth is that there's like a bunch of different spheres within spheres or whatever, like those Russian dolls. I forgot how you say
Oh
it.
yeah. Uh,
Mr. Earth.
Brain hurt. I
Whatever.
can't remember. Yeah, what
Everyone knows what they
the
are.
the, the nesting dolls.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you've been to a garage sale, you've seen them.
yeah. And
So
that's an interesting thing. Like it's like I think I've read Journey to the Center of the Earth and stuff like that, and it's a nice fanciful tale, and I think subterranean architecture we're really not familiar with to any great degree. Even like deep in the ocean, it's like we really have barely scratched the surface. So there's probably all kinds of weird stuff down there.
mhm.
Um, and I think it'd be interesting, knowing a tiny amount about astrophysics. Like I don't think that there would be concentric circles and caverns necessarily, like in layers deep under the earth, but it's a good thing to think about. It's a lot of fun, and it
Yeah,
could yield some like really cool stories and things like that.
yeah. I mean, what we know about geology basically shoots that out of the water. That's one of the least plausible ones, but like, and I don't know, the alien one could be a pretty good explanation, given the benefit of the doubt that aliens exist and did visit us at least at one point or something.
Well, I mean, the idea is we might be the aliens basically, or
Yeah,
their offspring or something like that.
yeah. But I think that some of the more plausible ones are either volcanic destruction or sinking, because we have seen that phenomena. Port Royale or something in the Caribbean sank um,
Yeah.
within, I don't know, the last couple 100 years, I think. So
Hmm.
it's not like legend or lore. It's been, like there. That was actually like a bustling port city for quite a long time during the early stages of the Americas, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
You know, so
Oh,
it's
and,
not
and that
not
happens all
possible.
the time. Yeah, throughout history, it has, at least.
Mhm. And like the rise and fall with ice ages and just global changes in temperature, water levels come and go. There's plenty of underwater relics from long lost civilizations.
Well, and that is certainly a thing. It's definitely a fact that civilizations existed in areas that are now covered by water. That like the last major ice age or something ended, and sea levels rose to the point it just swallowed everything up. And we're now discovering that those kinds of places. I mean, maybe that's the origin of such tales. I mean,
Well, it all stems back to
specifically.
Plato. Like
Well,
Plato,
yeah, that exactly. That was what I was going to say. Plato is the origin specifically of Atlantis.
yeah,
Um, Maybe not the idea of a sunken civilization, but Atlantis particularly.
yeah. Like I think that's where our paper trail starts, basically.
Hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, it was in that Timaeus and Critus or something. Basically, it was a fable that he was writing. So it's
Yeah, there were two stories that included the tale of Atlantis.
yeah. So already it's kind of not even being put forth as historical fact, but as people started to discover things under the water, they started trying to put two and two together and say, well, could this have been Atlantis, or what they called Atlantis, or
Well, and even back in the day, before we had the technology to explore the depths of the ocean and things like that, people still uh, had those kinds of ideas because we didn't know, we hadn't explored the entire surface of the earth yet. Um, so yeah, I think Yeah, it was certainly in the case of Atlantis, the that place was like a storytelling tool that Plato used for like a moral tale, I guess. Because people talk about Atlantis as being some kind of utopia, but it totally wasn't. It was a corrupt, terrible war, like warlike nation, I guess. And it was destroyed by its own hubris, is kind of the idea, which is kind of like a classic sort of storytelling structure.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a story that we should be reminding ourselves of. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
but well, what do you think about the idea that they were technologically advanced? Do you think that's just for their time, or do you subscribe to the idea that it was like something that we haven't even seen in modern days now?
I mean, okay, so putting aside, like, to me, I think Atlantis is an allegorical element. Like, I don't think it's like a real place necessarily. However, I think those kinds of ideas, the origin of that goes back a lot further. Um, and there are quite a few similar kinds of stories about sunken cities or lost civilizations and things like that, with ridiculously high levels of technological capability. And it, it might kind of speak to this whole spacefaring exploration, people landing on this planet and interacting with what was here, and starting again, and kind of like I guess a interplanetary homesteading, I guess. And you have, well, we could go into the man machine, but I think that should probably be its own episode,
Yeah,
because I think that's kind of connected. The idea that maybe people, some beings from another place, as like, were exploring, and they came here and they either crashed or intentionally landed here, and they're stuck, and the technology slowly disappeared, and they told their stories to their children and the children's children and stuff like that, and they didn't necessarily have a written language, maybe, or the ability to permanently record the stories, and things just twisted over time. And maybe that's how we have kind of, it could even be the origin of a lot of major religions too, because there are some similarities there, that I think are pretty striking and significant enough. They're something that one should take notice of. Um, yeah, but
no,
as far as the technology goes, yeah, oof. I mean, it's difficult to separate, because we think that sci-fi and things like that are a modern creation, but it was certainly a thing that people fantasized about back in the early days too. It's the whole like kind of what if scenario, or imagining what it's going to be like in the future, taking primitive today's technology and kind of carrying it through a few generations and imagining what you could do with it,
oh
and
yeah,
telling a story.
I think one of the biggest uh, parts of the core of innovation is just imagination. Like
Oh,
what,
what?
whatever you can think of, you think, well, shit, I should try to make that. You know?
Yeah, yeah. There's the whole like idea that Star Trek, changed the modern world, and um, I think the inventor of the cell phone actually was a huge Star Trek fan, and he wanted to create a communicator, like in the original series, the little flip top thing with the
Yeah.
bronze antenna cover thing. He was looking to create that, and he created the cell phone, and here we are. Now we've got computers in our pockets and stuff. It's like, I think those kinds of fanciful stories serve a very valuable purpose, because it kind of encourages people to dream and strive for things beyond what is common and everyday kind of stuff. Like, maybe do something uh, bigger and it could even drive you to do it, um, keep you from getting too discouraged, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah. So the whole idea of it being like an existing island that's actually still even around is pretty plausible. Like I think it was called Thera. I forget what it's called in modern times now, but it had that circular kind of pattern with I think there was a central volcano or something. So it was kind of like a circle within a circle. They were, pretty advanced.
Oh, you're talking about Santorini.
That's it, Santorini.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they were pretty advanced for the time, considering like most people in Europe were in mud huts, and they had like these complex structures, like almost pyramid-like, and um, opulent, fancy stuff that they'd wear, and there was all kinds of like religion and social structure and gold and stuff like that. Clearly like still proto, you know, what we think of as civilization, but it was like way ahead of whatever was, passing for civilization at the time. So
well, certainly, certainly Santorini could have been an inspiration, because that island was, well, it wasn't completely destroyed and submerged, but a giant portion of it was basically exploded and pushed underwater by a volcanic eruption, and
like 100 times stronger than St. Helens.
Yeah, that was a big deal, and I'm sure there were a lot of stories told about that, and maybe Plato took, I can't quite recall exactly when that eruption took place, but it could have served as an inspiration for Plato's story of the Atlantis and things like that. And people, of course, every time somebody tells a story, they embellish on it. So what was originally something fairly mundane suddenly becomes something highly technologically advanced with all kinds of cool features and stuff like that, for the sake of telling a story, because you don't want your story to be boring. So, but then people hear the story or they read it and then they add their own things to it, as people are wont to do, and then you go several thousand years into the future, and all of a sudden Atlantis is full of like people with spaceships and lasers and gravitational force field machinery and stuff, and it's like
So like the Santorini thing, I think, was on the scale of hundreds of years before Plato. And people, so Plato said it happened 9,000 years before his time, so we're talking like 11,500 years ago or something. But people are like, well, it was a mistranslation. He didn't mean 9,000, he meant 900, so that they could kind of link it up with Santorini. Either way, what you're talking about here is a story being passed down for hundreds or thousands of years and then getting written down. It's just like the Bible, where a lot of people think the Bible was written by people that actually knew Jesus. They were all written hundreds of years after his death.
Yeah, a lot of the stories were told word of mouth for generations. And of course, back then, since you didn't have the written language, word of mouth was probably a little bit more reliable as a form of communication, because that's how people did things. So it might have been a little bit less deviant in its retelling. But nevertheless, like you involve people, and here's the thing: you're sitting around a fire telling a story or something like that. Everybody adds things to it. That's what you do when you tell a story. So you're talking like hundreds of generations of people telling stories around fires and things like that. It's bound to be different. It's not ever going to be the same as the original story, because we don't have the original text, as far as I know, of a lot of those things.
They were probably sitting around fires and stories were probably like a core element of their being, and so I
Sure.
imagine it was probably very reliable because they had these stories. It's like it was rote memorization. They're always like Jericho when the walls fell, and then it gets bastardized into Shaka when the walls fell.
Well, and there might have been a little bit of imbibing of alcoholic beverages during the storytelling, so things get a little twisted at that point.
Gil.
Um, Gilgamesh. Oh. Mm.
Mm.
Now, yeah, I think one of the cool things about the Atlantis story is, because like I just like the Hollow Earth kind of thing and all this stuff. Like I think it's kind of mostly not a real thing, based on some, maybe loosely based on real world events, but a lot of the things surrounding it aren't real. But I think it's a great story, and it also encourages people to get out and explore. Like, people looking for Atlantis have found some cool things, like actual real world historical, like artifacts and
Oh yeah,
places and things like
there's
that. And so
places
that in
all
itself,
over.
huh?
There's places all over that are being pointed to and being like, that's Atlantis, all the way from like Ireland down to South America almost. Like,
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's like that kind of the struggle to try to find those kinds of things. Like, speaking of mysterious places, the Fountain of Youth or something like that. That's led to the exploration of all of the Americas. People trying to find that, they found all kinds of cool stuff. They didn't find the Fountain of Youth, but they found really cool things and went all over the place. Otherwise, everybody's just going to sit home and masturbate and drink beer all day. You
well,
know.
nothing wrong with that. But
Well, that's true, yeah. But it's kind of cool that it yields like real world, um, positive effects, even if you don't find the thing you're looking for.
yeah,
Like, people, there's people who strongly believe that Atlantis is a real thing, and they have a bunch of money, and they'll fund these expeditions to find Atlantis. And they don't find it, but then they find something else that's equally cool, like, or actually cooler. Um, so because we haven't charted most of the Earth, honestly. So at least in a micro level, let's say,
yeah.
especially when you go underwater.
I think Atlantis is one of those things, kind of like the Bible. Like Jesus might have been a real person, but I think he probably wasn't a real person. I think he was a philosophy. I think he was a conglomeration of a lot of people with similar ideas. You know, much in the same way with Atlantis, there probably were a lot of really great civilizations on islands. Because if you think about it, an island is pretty isolated.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to have a society that functions really well because you don't have a lot of outsiders influencing things. You're kind of stuck in one place, at least back before travel was easy, and
Mhm.
and it's easy for a philosophy to become kind of prevalent there, and possibly even a very particular type of philosophy that is required to make a system like that work. So I
Yeah.
think that these 10 different spots or whatever under the ocean that are possible Atlantises, maybe they're all the idea of Atlantis. Maybe they all had that same kind of history, same philosophies and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're in an isolated pocket of civilization in the middle of an ocean, um, it's kind of like a great way to have an independently developed philosophical structure created, and experimented on without influence from outside.
Yeah.
And today, obviously, with the internet, well, everybody everything reaches everywhere. There's internet on everywhere. Basically, you can connect to the internet. And back then, that wasn't the case. You could live for thousands of years on an island nation and have no outside contact whatsoever.
And yeah, like the island effect in evolution shows that, you know, certain traits can get amplified. You get giant tortoises in the Galapagos. You get pygmy animals in some circumstances. That evolutionary phenomena also applies to philosophy, I think, because you can totally have an island effect in philosophy, you know?
Well, sure, exactly. If you don't have, if there's only a small proportion of ideas, or if there's, say, like a kingdom and there's one or a small fraction of people controlling the system who have a particular ideology, and nobody else with different ideas ever comes in, particularly nobody else with different ideas and better guns comes in, it'll remain the same and it'll have a chance to develop. And so, yeah, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah. Like, you know, the Amish are probably like a really good modern day example of an island effect with, you know, not only philosophical island effects going on, but, you know, I'm sure there's probably some biological island effects that maybe not to the naked eye or whatever, but you know, I think we briefly touched on this when we were talking with the anti-vaxxer Etienne, and he was pointing to the Amish community and saying, like, they don't get vaccines and there's hardly any autism there. And I was like, well, they're a small gene pool, so if autism is not already in the gene pool, yeah, it's probably not going to be too prevalent. But, you know, that's just an idea.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Amish, I really like the Amish. I kind of think it's pretty cool because they actually really coexist in parallel with modern societies, and they pretty much have discarded all like modern technology. And it's interesting. It's
I have seen them like drive when they need to, or, you know, like to take a sick farm animal to the vet or whatever. You know, you're not gonna like be like, walk it off. You know, you gotta
let's just throw this giant heavy ass cow into the back of a horse-drawn carriage and work our way downtown. You know, that's not going to happen. And
it would be cool to have an Amish person on the show and interview.
We totally should. That'd be cool.
You know, we might have to like use an old reel-to-reel or something that they'd be okay with. I don't know.
I've got a 16 millimeter film camera. We could record that beforehand. So, yeah. Good luck though finding the film for it. It's a little tricky these days. But maybe the Amish have it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah, it's. I think. Oh wait, have you heard of Zealandia?
Oh, that's off the coast of Australia and New Zealand, right?
It's basically a submerged continent that surrounds New Zealand. And I can't remember exactly. It's probably millions of years ago when it submerged, or 12,000 years ago if you're one of those like diehard Christians. But yeah, it's like it's a real thing like that, and there's quite a lot of those kinds of places dotted around the world. So maybe, you know, a lot of these kinds of things could be maybe the origin of this kind of idea. And I don't know there necessarily has to be a specific situation to be the origin of lost civilizations. I think human beings just look for and crave those kinds of stories. Like we dream of faraway places and places to explore and discover and stuff. And I think the stories could be born out of just our interest in such things. But there's certainly like real world things. It's not like there are no places on the planet that are not, like submerged cities are a real thing. So could Atlantis be one of those? Maybe. I don't know. It's like, I feel like the story of Atlantis, when you look into it, is clearly intended to be a teaching tool. It's something made up. Is it based on something real? Maybe, possibly. Yeah.
What about the idea of it being a spaceship, though? Like,
well,
where does that fall in your ranking of plausibility?
Well, okay. From a scientific standpoint, I think the plausibility is very low. Probabilistically, I think it's very low. However, I do ascribe to the idea that it's possible that the human race was seeded in some way from other worlds. There's certainly a few technological, historical details that kind of make me think that the mana machine and things like that, which we will talk about. But I think,
well, I'm on board with that. It's just the timeline for Atlantis, as far as at least as far as us actually being aliens. I don't think the timeline really works out because there's an overwhelming amount of evidence in our evolutionary time scale to show where we actually came from. Stuff. But I don't think it's necessarily out of the realm of possibility that other life forms in the universe would look similar enough, humanoid, because there's a reason that evolution favors certain structures. Like we don't see three-armed things like the Star Trek animated series with arm coming out of the chest kind of thing. You don't see that kind of stuff because it doesn't really favor survivability, and so the idea that there could be humanoid visitors it seems a little more plausible to me than the fact that we're actually just aliens that got put here by another alien race or whatever. And you see that in like when you watch those ancient alien shows, they've got they show in South America there's this little statue with an oblong head like the Discovery Star Trek Klingons or whatever, and and then you see the same.
They're not Klingons, damn it. Anyway, go ahead.
Then you see the same thing in Egypt, and it's like, well, they couldn't have crossed paths. How did they have these things that were all bulbous and totally didn't look human? And they've got these like funny shaped eyes, and yeah. So I don't know. It's possible, I think.
Yeah, I mean, exchange of information might have been easier during an ice age. People could practically walk across the ocean during that time. So I think the idea that ideas were not exchanged is kind of bullshit. But yeah, I mean, how many M-class planets are there to go into Star Trek territory? And if there's explorers who are exploring a place, they're going to find a place that's like home. If you're a gas bag alien, you're going to go for gas giants or something like that and go to Jupiter and stuff like that. And if you're a bipedal humanoid kind of person, you'd come to Earth. And I think, from a developmental standpoint, from an evolutionary standpoint, I think we're dealing with the same building blocks, and the likelihood of everything out there kind of evolving in similar ways, because it's based on the same structural algorithm. So why wouldn't things be sort of compatible?
Yeah.
And why wouldn't they like seek out other places like we do? We are currently doing that. So and we may find there are like infinite planets. Basically, at one point in time, we thought Sol, our home star, was the only place with planets that we could detect. And once we started looking for planets, I think it was the Kepler program. Basically, every star has planets. There's planets everywhere. They're all over the place. So I think it's plausible that somebody could have come here. Were they the genesis of humanoid life on this planet? I don't know. Was there humanoid life on this planet, and somebody came from somewhere else and interbred with whatever was here, and now we have us? Possibly. That's kind of the direction that I lean as far as my own personal philosophy. But I'm open to different ideas. It's just
I mean, I like that idea from an entertainment value standpoint. Biologically speaking, an alien race coming to interbreed with us could possibly produce offspring, but the likelihood that offspring would be fertile is next to none.
Yeah.
We would like that would be like a donkey, basically. Like a donkey is a horse and a mule put together, but that donkey cannot have baby donkeys. They're sterile,
Yeah.
like because their genes, even though they look really close to each other, their genes are nowhere near close enough to produce fertile offspring. So
Yeah.
I don't know that it would make much sense. Like on Star Trek, where you see half human, half Vulcan. Probably not.
No, but in our case, speaking probabilistically, yes, it's a long shot, but it could still happen, and maybe we're one of those cases where two somewhat distant but nearby planetary systems interacted, and they just happen to be a good fit. I think it's possible. Or maybe they just wiped out all life on the planet and supplanted it with their own. Like there's tales of mass destruction on a planetary level. So you never know.
Yeah, but like the idea of aliens, like at least influencing early culture, doesn't seem.
I absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, because back then, I like you said, we didn't even think there could be other planets anywhere else. So people back then probably just saw whatever fascinated them as a god and were totally on board with talking to them. Whereas now everyone would be scared shitless because they saw Independence Day,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think a lot of, if such encounters occurred, they would certainly spawn a sort of religion amongst the peoples. A good example is Stargate. Speaking of Atlantis, because they had a TV series, Stargate SG-1, and they had Stargate Atlantis.
Yeah.
And in the movie Stargate, in particular, they kind of touched on that idea that this vastly technologically superior species sort of enslaved planets to do their bidding, and these peoples created their own sort of religion around it.
That was a
they kind
great
of went,
movie.
yeah, it was a really good movie. Yeah.
Like you had your
And
quintessential 90s nerd with the glasses and shoulder length hair and I don't know, flannel. Like
yeah, exactly.
but yeah, no, it's definitely interesting to think about that sort of thing. Just it's entertaining to think of it as a possibility, just because how cool would that be?
Well, and I think it's still possible to some extent. Like maybe it's possible. I when I was a kid, I believed in those kinds of things a lot more. But then, Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy and stuff like that. Sorry to destroy your world, kids. But the thing is, going back to how Star Trek influenced our current modern world, that people heard of these stories or they watched a TV show or something like that, and it gave them that spark of inspiration to try to do something bigger and to try to explore and get out there and do something amazing. So I think there's value, whether it's an actual thing or not. Because again, if you're looking for Atlantis and you discover some kind of lost civilization under the ocean that isn't Atlantis, well, that's equally as cool. That's pretty cool. Yeah, you didn't discover Atlantis, but holy shit, there's something we didn't even know existed.
Might find mermaids.
Yeah. Oh, I wish. Yeah. Oh, that's its own topic. Well, we need to talk about the mana machine soon. I think that would be.
Do. We should do that very soon, because it's been a long time coming. We've alluded to it so many times.
Yeah.
And, I don't know that we're ever going to get an interview with the last surviving author. He hasn't reached out to me.
Well,
responded to me, I should say.
Yeah,
I'm not sitting around waiting for him to reach out to me.
We've both done research and have books and stuff like that, and I have my own ideas. That would be pretty cool. Well, and it's kind of connected with this whole like lost civilization and spacefaring peoples kind of thing. Like I think that would be a really fun one.
Yeah.
So speaking of
two-parter.
yeah, exactly.
Come back next week and we'll talk about the Man Machine.
Yeah. Oh man. Because I am so stoked about that. Like that is a huge deal to me. I love that topic. Just I guess is probably like getting close to time to wrap things up. But I what other tales of lost civilizations interest you?
I really enjoy, I mean, these aren't so fantastical, but I really enjoy hearing about anytime archaeology discovers that, some form of humans were someplace way earlier than we ever thought they were. I really find that super cool. Like here in the Americas, we're constantly finding that, people were here like even before the Native Americans. Like,
yeah,
like what's up with that? Like, where'd they come from? What's the theory there?
Oh, it's so cool. That's why I wish I had a time machine.
Yeah. What was it? Kennewick Man or something that was in the Washington.
Say that again. What was that?
Was it Kennewick Man that they found in the Washington area, and they like dated it so far back that it was like it basically said that the Native Americans weren't the first here, and then they were like, give that back, it's tribal stuff, don't touch it, don't look at
it. Not that you have to be the first person or peoples into a place to claim that you have some kind of ownership or interest in an area,
right?
I think it's valid. Like
you and I are valid Americans, because it's not our fault that our great grandfather came over here and slaughtered Native Americans.
Wait, but
you were born here.
Our relatives, we're both Scandinavian at heart, so we actually
we were the first assholes. Yeah,
exactly.
Came over and killed them way before Columbus.
And I think that's a really important point for people to consider, that things go through waves and stages, and time isn't black and white. There's so many. We're talking millions of years of humans and creatures of humanoid structure on this planet. Well, correct me if I'm wrong as a biologist, if that's actually the case or not. But
Sorry, what? That we were here for millions of years?
yeah, like something like humans.
Something like humans, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, our particular species and subspecies is about 100,000 years old, I think,
Mm-hmm.
roughly.
Yeah, 100,000 years is a long time.
Yeah.
And a lot happens. And we have only, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, only very recently had actual paper, like writing down things kind of records, and very recently had photographic and video records of things. So yeah, it's
Well, yeah, just think about that. Like 100,000 years to 10,000 years ago is how long it took to basically form the first inkling of civilization.
yeah.
And then from like 10,000 years ago to like 3,000 years ago, we basically were able to just kind of like grunt and tell stories. And then, we started writing things down, and all of a sudden we started building things and forming nuclear families. And it's amazing to see what we're capable of building on the shoulders of giants.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why it's so cool to look back and see little bits and pieces of people that were really ahead of the game at the time.
Yeah.
Like Atlantis, if it was a real place, or if it's just an allegory for several places that were like that, whatever the case may be. I think it's super cool to see that, those were like the Elon Musks of their time.
yeah. And in general, they'd be seen as heretics in their day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you're talking, like things happen exponentially. We're talking 100,000 years of, well, or tens of thousands of years of, we just created fire and we understand fire, and we're all hunter gatherers and live in mud huts and stuff and feed ourselves by the day, that kind of thing for tens of thousands of years. And then you've got like the creation of iron and civilizations and the written language and stuff, and that still carries on for 10,000 years or something like that. And then we get to the 20th century, and it's like, in the early days, in the early 1900s, there were still people riding horses.
Yeah.
And at the end of that century, we had developed the nuclear technology, all of the cool electronics, computers, flight, jet power, all kinds of crazy medical technologies like polymer technologies and nanobots and all kinds of stuff. And we were in space, and just in 100 years condensed down, all that change happened. And so it kind of makes me think, like, what's it going to be like the next 100 years? Are we going to have that kind of exponential change where every decade gets ever increasingly more technologically advanced? Or are we going to just like give up and be like lazy and watch Netflix and chill?
Well, I think that would be an interesting topic to go into, as well as whether or not there could be a technological singularity where we just don't advance anymore.
Yeah,
because there's a whole lot of angles to go into on that.
Well, technological advancement is dependent on knowledge. So it's all a matter of what we can discover and uncover.
Knowledge and need.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, we're not going to necessarily develop something purely for the sake of development, although that does happen.
Yeah.
but in general, there's a reason for it. And one could argue that war does push people in that direction. I think World War II is a good example of that, of how so much technological change happened in just those few years because of necessity. And maybe even at the time, they didn't even know why they were doing what they did, but that's how we have all this cool stuff that we have today, and it's used for peace, and it should be. So just to kind of like finalize things, like some of my favorite lost civilization stories, well, there's basically two of them apart from Atlantis. Atlantis is awesome, but El Dorado, the lost city of gold, which actually started off as a story about a guy who used to coat himself in gold dust because he was that badass. And then it morphed slowly over time into a place, and then a civilization and a kingdom and stuff like that, and it became this kind of like tale of a lost city of gold. And I love that story. I don't know if
I've heard of it. I'm
yeah.
not familiar with it.
How about Shangri-La?
Isn't that like a Mother Love Bone song?
Or well, it could be a Billy Idol song if you're into the album Cyberpunk, which is my favorite Billy Idol album, by the way. Excellent song. Yeah. It's man. We should probably wrap things up because I think we're going pretty far in.
Yeah. So if you've got ideas about Atlantis that we missed, or you just want to chime in on something that we talked about, go ahead and leave that in the comments. Don't forget to check out ksmvidcast.com and of course, hang out for the music. So.
Oh yeah, exactly. And if you have any stories about lost civilizations, I think please share them. Things that you're into, we definitely like to hear it. So yeah, thanks for deep sink diving with us into particularly Atlantis, but any lost civilization for that matter. Yeah.
Actual deep sink diving this time into the ocean.
Oh.
All right. Have a good night.